Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, Chapter 8, Halacha 1. This is part 2 of this year. And today we're going to be covering the position of Bet Shammai. Again, to recap, you have the opinion of Bet Shammai and the opinion of Bet Hillel. And there's a disagreement as to whether it's going to be the Kiddush that's going to be bringing in the Shabbos, or it's going to be the Shabbos that's bringing in the Kiddush. And then we're also going to be looking at the ending of it. In other words, is it going to be the ending that's going to be ending Shabbat, or is it that it's going to be ending and then you're doing Havdalah? So which is which? Now, these disagreements on the order are going to be coming up again later on when we're actually getting into the meal. And right now, we're talking about the Kiddush to start the wine, to hear it, and to start the Kiddush to make the Shabbat start. And then there's going to be a question that comes up later on in chapter 8 about the order at which we're going to be doing bread. And this is going to come in later to be dealing with issues of hefsek, whether there's going to be a hefsek or not, what's the right order. But right now, this is getting into what's going to be triggering the start of it. This is very important stuff. So the Gemara is going to look at the position of Bet Shammai, and it's going to say, this is, by the way, from the Mishnah, and from the position that the Mishnah was talking about. So the Gemara reads, and there's a difficulty with regards to the view of Bet Shammai on the eve of Shabbat. That's going to be Friday night, of course. And the Gemara says, how is someone to conduct themselves according to Bet Shammai in the following situation? So in the question that's being posed, the Gemara is going to put two sides that could be held by Bet Shammai, and they're going to try to figure out which it is. In other words, the first is going to be their opinion regarding the precedence of the Kiddush blessing over the wine blessing. And the second is going to be their position regarding the last Mishnah of this chapter, that one who recites Birkat Hamazon over a cup of wine should recite a blessing over the wine before Birkat Hamazon. And the Gemara is going to try to show that there's a situation where the fulfillment of both of these rules are going to become impossible, says the Pnei Moshe to explain this. So this is a subtext of what's going on with this, and basically the idea of what's coming up is that the individual has only one cup of wine, and he's forced to put the wine aside until after the meal so that he can recite Birkat Hamazon over it together with the Kiddush. So the question is going to be with the Halacha, and what's going to happen also if that were to occur on Birkat Hamazon, where you have a single cup of wine for both Berechot and Havdalah. And so the question is going to be, what do you do? Now, in general, the Halacha is going to be talking about where someone is in the middle of a meal when the Shabbat arrives and he has to stop and recite Kiddush. You can find more about that in the Yerushalmi and Psachim 10.1. But the rabbis made an exemption on the case in order to have recitation of Birkat Hamazon over the wine. So there's a few things going on here. You have the case of what would happen if there's this one cup of wine left. What would happen if it was this one cup of wine left is going to be before Shabbat or after Shabbat. And what would be happening if they were having this one cup and it was going to be where they still have to say Birkat Hamazon, but then the Shabbat comes in. And so what do? You have one cup of wine, and Shabbat now came in, and, are you going to be using it for Kiddush, or are you going to be using it for Birkat Hamazon? Because we were just learning in chapter 7 about Zimun. Zimun's supposed to be made over a cup of wine. So what's going to be the order? Now, these are Talmudic points, and this is not necessarily something that would happen in the real world. So it's unlikely that somebody's going to be sitting there eating a bread meal right before Shabbat to where they have to say Berechot Hamazon. And then they also, on top of that, have 1 cup of wine left. What do? The reason that they're doing this is they're trying to prove a point. It's not trying to prove what do you actually do. And that's something that a lot of critics of the Talmud miss. When you hear people criticizing, particularly like white racist supremacists, are saying that, God forbid, the Jewish law and the Talmud, they'll say, is the most immoral system of law in the world, and they'll look at the Talmudic points on a 3-year-old losing her hymen, and then what they'll do is they'll say, you see, the sages are really pedophiles, God forbid. And again, what they're missing is that there's a Talmudic point. It's not something that actually happens in the real world. They're trying to make a point for, in the case of somebody who converted before the age of 3, and in dealing with the laws for a Kohen Gadol, because there's a specific mandate in the Torah that they have to marry a virgin. And then you have issues of, well, how do you know if they're a virgin or not? And about the, with the hymen and things like that. Anyway, those are Talmudic points. They're not cases that are actually happening where anybody's doing anything with somebody of that age. It's trying to come up to show you other implications of it. And the same thing is happening over here. And you should be aware that these sorts of Talmudic points are all over the place to try to prove a point, and that they're not actually, I mean, could it happen? Yes, right? In this case, could it happen where someone is eating a bread meal right before the end of Shabbat, and right before Shabbat comes in, and they only have 1 cup of wine left, and then you have a decision, and there happens to be, 3 men, and you need a cup of wine for Zimun, and Shabbat just came in, and should you be using that on Kiddush or Berechot Hamazon? That's kind of the question. So the Gemara reads like this: if he was sitting and eating on Friday afternoon, and darkness fell with the arrival of the Shabbat Eve, and there was not any wine available except for a single cup. And it says that you will say that he should leave the cup until after the meal and link all of the blessings, such as Berechot Hamazon and Kiddush, to it. So the idea is that, you have, this, the halacha is also, going to be where, if you have a single cup of wine for both Berechot Hamazon and Havdalah, that's actually, what's going to be the halacha. But in general, we're talking about someone who is in the middle of a meal when Shabbat arrives, and what do you really have to do? You really are supposed to stop eating and say Kiddush. That's really what you're supposed to do. Now, this is where, the rabbis made an exemption in this case in order to enable the recitation of Berechot Hamazon over wine. But that's going to be, the question where, of the mitzvah to recite Berechot Hamazon over a cup of wine, and what are you going to do, right? So the Gemara is going to consider this very complicated problem, and it's going to solve it. It's going to say, whatever sequence you consider for reciting these blessings seems problematic. So it seems to be complicated. And the Gemara asks, it says, should you first recite the blessing over the sanctity of the day, which would be Kiddush? And according to Bet Shammai, it emerges that the blessing over the meal, which is going to be Berechot Hamazon, should precede Kiddush. Now again, this is going to be a case where according to Bet Shammai, it's going to be the wine that brings in the Shabbat. That's the point. So that if you get to a point where you're eating bread and you're saying Berechot Hamazon and the Shabbat just came in, it's like the wine has just covered that obligation. That's why this point here about the bread just before covers it. That's not necessarily going to be the opinion of Bet Hillel, but that's basically what Bet Shammai is getting at here. Okay, Gemara says that should he first recite the blessing over the meal, And this too is unacceptable because in Bet Shammai's view, in the final mission of this chapter, it is the blessing over the wine that precedes Birkat HaMazon. So the question then the Gemara asks is, should he first recite the blessing over the wine? And the problem with that is that, Bet Shammai would state in this Mishnah that the blessing over the sanctity of the day precedes the blessing over the wine. And so it would appear that trying to get all of these opinions of Bet Shammai in this situation would seem to be impossible. So Birkat HaMazon, was already in effect before Shabbat arrived. And, in Bet Shammai's opinion, the blessings are supposed to be said in chronological order. Now, the Haredim points out about this, that in a Mishnah at the end of this chapter, that's just how it works, where sometimes, things jump around, but Halacha 8, which is the last Halacha of chapter 8, the Gemara is going to be talking about someone who is presented with a cup of wine at the end of a meal, and he should recite the blessing over the wine first, followed by Birkat HaMazon. Now, this is going to be problematic. All of this is problematic according to Bet Shammai. Now, I want to point out that in the methodology of Bet Hillel, there's no difficulty with this at all. And the idea is that the blessing of wine would be recited after Birkat HaMazon, and they would hold that the blessing over the wine precedes the blessing of the Kiddush. And in the Gemara's case, one would say Birkat HaMazon, and then they would say the blessing over the wine, followed by Kiddush. And this would accommodate the wine requirement by everybody, but according to the sequence of Bet Hillel, that both the Birkat HaMazon and the Kiddush would be in the right sequence, and by doing it in the sequence of what Bet Hillel would be, you basically dispatch both obligations, okay? So the Gemara is going to resolve this problem, and it's going to say, learn the answer from the following explanation of Bet Shammai's position regarding the precedence of wine, the wine blessing over Birkat HaMazon. And the final mission of the chapter says, if wine was brought to them after the meal, that's basically before Birkat HaMazon, and there was not any wine available except for that single cup, Bet Shammai says that you recite the blessing over the wine and afterward recite the blessing over the meal. Gemara says, Rabbi Ba says in this explanation of why Bet Shammai holds the blessing over the wine to be recited first, he says that since the blessing over the wine is a short blessing, we are concerned that if one were to wait until after Birkat HaMazon to recite it, he might forget to drink the wine without having recited the blessing. And here, however, in the case of this discussion, Gemara says, since he must ultimately link the Kiddush blessing to the cup, he will not forget to recite the blessing over the wine. And therefore, he does not say the wine blessing before Birkat HaMazon. Now, the Haredim explains this. He says that the Gemara is asserting that when Birkat HaMazon is followed by Kiddush, one who has finished saying Birkat HaMazon will remember that he needs to say Kiddush and the blessing over the wine. And because these two blessings are a relatively sizable recitation, that, the worry is that, maybe he would forget or something like that. Bet Shammai would agree, though, that the blessing over the wine may not be recited over Birkat HaMazon, since we are not concerned about the wine being mistakenly drunk without a blessing. In other words, the fear could be that they forgot and they drunk it because it's all out of order, and they accidentally drank this without a blessing. That's part of the worry. And the Gemara is going to conclude this. Now, real quick, right? The blessing over the wine, we all know it's the Beurim blessing. And Rabbi Ba is basically saying that if someone were to say Birkat HaMazon first while holding the cup of wine in the hand, they might automatically forget and swallow the wine after completing Berechot Mazon without saying the additional blessing. And Bet Shammai is basically saying that as a rule, one must recite the blessing over the wine before Berechot Mazon to make sure that this doesn't get forgotten. That's really the idea here. And the Gemara is going to conclude this and it's going to say, how then should he proceed according to Bet Shammai? In other words, how does Bet Shammai do this in this case, in this Talmudic case? And the Gemara reads that he should first recite the blessing over the meal, and then recite the blessing over the sanctity of the day, and then recite the blessing over the wine. Now, Pnei Moshe points out that this accords with Bet Shammai's view in the Mishnah that the blessing over the wine is recited over the sanctity of the day, and it also does not contradict the ruling that we have in chapter 8, Halacha 8, regarding Berechot Mazon. So that's the formulation. Let me read it again. He says that he should first recite the blessing over the meal, that would be Berechot Mazon, and then he should say the blessing over the sanctity of the day, and then he should recite the blessing over the wine. Okay. Now, that's going to be the view of Bet Shammai. Now, what about the opinion of Bet Hillel? The Gemara is going to get into the structure of Bet Hillel, and the Gemara says that there's a difficulty with regards to the view of Bet Hillel. Now, what are they doing? They are taking this basic point that we covered in part 1 of this year of does the wine bring in the Shabbat or does the Shabbat bring in the wine? And then what are they doing, right? They're looking at the problem of this on the front end with this case with Bet Shammai. And there's no problem with this in the back end for Bet Shammai. There's only a problem with this on the front end with Bet Shammai. Now, in the case of Bet Hillel, the sages are pointing out that there's a problem with this in the back end when you're doing Havdalah, at the end of Shabbat, with this logic, according to Bet Hillel, but there's no problem with this according to Bet Shammai. So now they're going to be pointing out the problem of this with Bet Hillel when Motzei Shabbos comes in. So look at the honesty of the sages. They're pointing out the issues with both of them. They're putting all the cards on the table, and they're letting you see how it works, all the issues, and then you'll be able to understand the nuances of it. So here's the problem with Bet Hillel's position. The Gemara says, and there's a difficulty with regards to the view of Bet Hillel. On the Motzei Shabbos, how is one to conduct himself according to Bet Hillel when the following situation comes up? So here's this situation on the back end. When Shabbat ends, here's how it is. We saw here, there was no problem with the opinion of Bet Hillel when the Shabbat starts. With this situation that Bet Shammai was struggling with, there's no problem with Bet Hillel. In the case of it ending, there's going to be no problem with Bet Shammai's formulation, but there will be a problem with Bet Hillel, and that's what this Gemara is going to point out. Gemara says, if he was sitting and eating on the afternoon of the Shabbos, in other words, that's going to be Shludah Shishit, the third meal, and darkness fell with the arrival of Motzei Shabbos. In other words, the 3 stars came out. And the next condition of this is, says the Gemara, that there was no wine left except for a single cup. So you have 3 conditions. You're eating, you got to do Berechot Mazon, Shabbat comes in, the 3 stars come out, it's Motzei Shabbos, and there's 1 cup of wine left. What do? It's the same case, except this is on the back end. The same case occurred on the front end with Bet Shammai, where you could see the issues over there. There's going to be issues here with Bet Hillel. Here's what happens. So the Gemara reads that you will say that he should leave the cup until after the meal and link all of the blessings, like Berechot Mazon and the blessings for the Havdalah, to it. And the Gemara is going to point out that whatever sequence you consider for reciting these blessings becomes problematic. So the idea here is that in order to say Berechot Mazon and Havdalah over a cup of wine, the person has no choice but to refrain from reciting Havdalah until he has finished his meal. And the Tosefta in 532 is teaching that one who has only 1 cup of wine on Motzei Shabbos should put it aside until after he's eaten and then recite Birkat Hamazon and Havdalah on it, says the Pnei Moshe. But the implication of this Yerushalmi is that to begin eating a meal on Motzei Shabbos before Havdalah is never allowed. And that's going to be even when there's only 1 cup of wine. That's another point. In other words, that this meal has to occur before Motzei Shabbos comes in. You can't have a meal and begin eating a meal on Motzei Shabbos before Havdalah is said. And that's even where a cup of wine is. Now, that's what this implication is here. You can see that the Rosh also is going to be talking about a similar view with this. And the Gemara is going to say, whatever sequence you're going to consider is going to be problematic. So the Gemara asks and says, should he first recite the blessing over the wine? And Bet Hillel was basically saying before in this Mishnah in Halacha 8, chapter 8, Halacha 8, that the blessing over the meal, says the Gemara, that the meal would precede the blessing over the wine. So that's going to be the question. Now, the Pnei Moshe is going to point out and say that Bet Hillel's view in the Mishnah in chapter 8, Halacha 8, in dispute with Bet Shammai, is that Bet Hillel is holding that one who is saying Birkat Hamazon over a cup of wine must say the wine blessing after Birkat Hamazon. That's the trick. The Gemara says that should he first recite the blessing over the meal? And that is not an option either, because you're going to be having Havdalah coming up. And the Gemara says the blessing over the flame precedes Birkat Hamazon. Now, we saw that in a different Mishnah, in Halacha 5, that Bet Hillel is going to rule that the sequence of the blessing for one who possesses only a cup of wine on Motzei Shabbos, and it would be as follows. Okay, this is the order. He's saying that first the blessing over the lamp, that's going to be Beur Moreh Ha'esh, and then the blessing over the fragrant spices in this Hillel order, which is going to be Beur Minei Besamim, and then Birkat Hamazon, and then the Havdalah blessing. That's going to be Hamavdil. And the Mishnah does not mention when the blessing over the wine is going to be said. In any case, we see that the blessing over the lamp in this Gemara precedes the blessing of Birkat Hamazon. So that's going to be the point here. Then it says the lamp precedes. In other words, the blessing over the lamp and the flame is going to precede Birkat Hamazon. So the Gemara is going to say, should he first recite the blessing over the lamp, followed by the blessing over the fragrant spices, Birkat Hamazon, the blessing over the wine, and finally the Havdalah blessing? That's the question. Haredim says that this would adhere to the sequence outlined by Bet Hillel in Halacha 5 in the Mishnah, with the blessing over wine being recited immediately after Birkat Hamazon, according with Bet Hillel's position in Halacha 8, in chapter 8, Halacha 8. Now, according to Rabbi Manna, in the last discussion in the first part of Halacha 1, chapter 8, Halacha 1, first part of this shiur, that the Havdalah blessing, says the Gemara, precedes the blessing over the wine. Now, what's the question that gets brought up over here? And the question that comes up is that if you will say that the wine blessing should be said after Havdalah, that would be a problem with Bet Hillel's requirement that Birkat Hamazon is followed by the blessing over the wine. That's a big problem. That's a big problem for Bet Hillel. And when you take all of these factors into consideration, how can Bet Hillel's opinion come to fit into this particular case? Now, when you go through it carefully, there's no problem with this case at all for Bet Shammai. Bet Shammai has no problem with this, with the order. No issue with it. But there is a problem with Bet Shammai with this order. And it's going to be the opposite case, where in the beginning, there's an issue where if you have 1 cup of wine left in the formulation of Bet Shammai, but there's no problem if you have 1 cup of wine when Shabbat ends, according to Bet Shammai. And if you have 1 cup of wine left, and wine comes in with this meal, there's no problem at the start of Shabbat with Bet Hillel, but there is a problem at the end. So how does Bet Hillel deal with it at the end? And the Gemara is going to reply and it's going to answer. It's going to say, learn the answer from the following brisa. Rabbi Yehuda said, in a case where both Birkat Hamazon and Havdalah are recited over a single cup of wine, Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel do not disagree regarding Birkat Hamazon that it is recited at the beginning, nor regarding Havdalah that it is recited at the end. There's no disagreement. The Gemara says, regarding what did Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai disagree on? The Gemara says, regarding the proper sequence of the blessing that is recited over the lamp and the fragrant spices. Because Bet Shammai says the blessing over the fragrant spices is recited first, and afterward the blessing over the lamp. And Bet Hillel is saying the blessing over the light and the lamp is said first, and afterward the blessing over the fragrant spices. So, according to what the sequence of Motzei Shabbos blessings would be, according to what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, Bet Hillel says the sequence would be like this. Okay, he says that it would be first Birkat Hamazon, and then it would be the fragrant spices, and then it would be the lamp, and then Havdalah. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, it would be Birkat Hamazon first, then it would be the lamp, then it would be the fragrant spices, and then it would be Havdalah. Now, that's going to be the issue where dealing with where there's a single cup of wine at the end. Now, I want to point out the sequence that the Mishnah points out that is not dealing with a cup of wine. Okay, so according to the Mishnah elsewhere in Halacha 5, we're dealing with a case where they have plenty of wine, there's no dispute. What would be the order according to Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai over there? So, according to the Mishnah, the opinion of Bet Shammai is that when you have no problems with the wine, what would you do first? You would do the lamp first, Birkat Hamazon, fragrant spices, and then Havdalah. And what would you do with Bet Hillel if there was no problem with having the wine? And they would do the lamp first, fragrant spices, Birkat Hamazon, and then Havdalah. So this is getting to like the underpinnings of the dispute, and this opinion by Rabbi Yehuda is pointing out that you have really just a single cup left, and so the order would be a little bit different if there wasn't a problem where you already ate and this case came up where the meal still had to be done. And over here he's saying that it would be, according to Bet Hillel, first you would do Birkat Hamazon, and Bet Shammai agrees with that. You do Birkat Hamazon first. The disagreement between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai is whether you're going to do the lamp first or fragrant spices first, but everybody agrees that you end with Havdalah. So there's no disagreement with Birkat Hamazon first in this case, and there's no disagreement with Havdalah last. Question is lamp or fragrant spices. So the Gemara is going to say that Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai did not disagree regarding Birkat Hamazon, that it is recited at the beginning, nor did they disagree with Havdalah that it should be said at the end. No disagreement. What do they disagree on? It's the sequence over the lamp and the fragrant spices. And the Gemara says that Bet Shammai says the blessing over the fragrant spices should be said first, and afterward the blessing over the lamp. And Bet Hillel is saying that the blessing over the lamp should come first, and afterward should be the blessing over the spices. Now, the Gemara is going to try to defend Rabbi Mana's opinion that he accepts Rabbi Yuda's version in the dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, rather than the opinion of the version recited in the Mishnah. But again, a lot of this could be because you're dealing with a single cup of wine, and what should it be? It looks like there could be a dispute between the particular case over here and the Mishnah. In any case, the dispute is going to be the order where one says Berechot Hamazon and the blessings over the fragrant spices. And Bet Shammai is holding that Berechot Hamazon is going to be said before the fragrant spices, and Bet Hillel is going to actually hold the reverse. So the Gemara is going to look at the halachic decision based on this brisa, and the Gemara says that Rabbi Ba says in the name of Rav Yudah, the halacha accords with the one who says that the blessing over the fragrant spices is recited first, and afterward the blessing over the lamp. Now, that's going to be Rabbi Ba is saying that in the name of Rav Yudah, that it would be the case of Bet Shammai in this particular instance, but in the case of the Mishnah, in a normal circumstance, it would be the case of Bet Hillel. And so you could see in this case where normally there would be no problem with it, that there ends up being a problem in the sequence with Bet Hillel. When the cup of wine, the single last cup of wine, is served in this odd particular case where they've already started and the Shabbat just ended, and then what do? And there's only one cup of wine left. Again, they're only talking about where there's one cup of wine left. Where there's not a cup of wine left, a lot of these problems go away and are invisible on a day-to-day basis, and all you're getting is, should you be saying the lamp or the fragrant spices first? And that's going to be pretty minor, but in terms of which order you would say Berechot Hamazon and Havdalah, that would be a much more significant thing. So to try to make sure there's no ambiguity, says Haredim, Rabbi Ba and Rav Yudah did not simply identify the name of whom the halacha would follow and said it without any attribution at all. But these Amorim held the reading to be authoritative and ruled in accordance with Bet Hillel's opinion, as portrayed by the version that is understood by Rabbi Yudah. And so, the question is going to be that it looks like in some cases it could be Bet Shammai, but in fact it's going to be Rabbi Yudah's opinion from the Mishnah, not from this over here. So that gets to be very unclear, and the Gemara is going to try to clean this up so that the confusion goes away. The Gemara was talking about Rabbi Yudah's view that it's unanimous that the blessing over the lamp is going to be said after Berechot Hamazon, and the Gemara is going to conclude this response. And again, we're dealing with this strange situation that could be problematic with Bet Hillel at the end. We were just dealing with this strange situation that has no problem for Bet Hillel in the beginning, but is problematic for Bet Shammai. Now, how do they end this for Bet Hillel? And the Gemara says, how should someone proceed according to Bet Hillel in the case of our discussion where they're doing this meal and the Shabbat ends, the stars come out, and there's only one cup of wine left? How do they do it? And it says that he should first say the blessing over the meal, and they should recite the blessing over the wine, and then they should recite the blessing over the lamp, followed by the fragrant spices, and then the Havdalah. So the idea is that this arrangement is that the Havdalah blessing does not immediately follow Berechot Hamazon because there's blessings in between the lamp and the fragrant spices. and as such, the wine blessing may be recited immediately after Berechot and does not need to follow Havdalah. That would also be, by the way, according to Rabbi Mana, but since the wine blessing in this case will be completely separate from the Havdalah blessing, and so in the case where we are forced to choose between the wine blessing and Havdalah, the Havdalah would come first. That's going to be the idea. So according to Bet Hillel, one would first recite Birkat Hamazon, and that's, by the way, what Rabbi Yehuda would say. What Rabbi Yehuda is saying, Bet Hillel is saying, followed with the blessing over the wine, and that would be conforming with the opinion in chapter 8, Halacha 8, with Bet Hillel, where there's a case of wine left, one glass of wine left, and then it would proceed with the three blessings of the Havdalah service. That's going to be the formulation to clean it up, according to Bet Hillel. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about another instance where the proper sequence of blessings on Motzei Shabbos is going to be debated. And the Gemara says, regarding the case of Yom Tov, at the night that falls on Motzei Shabbos, so that one is required to say Kiddush, Havdalah, the blessings over the lamp and over the wine. And the Gemara says that, and by the way, just to point out something, that when you have a festival at the same time that Shabbat ends, Kiddush for the incoming festival is going to be said together with a special Havdalah blessing that would end with a clause that blesses Hashem, who separates between holiness and holiness, and that way you create honor for the Shabbat day that is ending. So I just want to point that out. That's the discussion that's coming up. The Gemara is going to give various opinions as to the proper order of these blessings. Now, when you're having this new case come up, okay. So in other words, you have the blessing over fragrant spices, and you have a blessing over a lamp, and you have a blessing over the ending, and also on the wine. So what's going to be the right order when you're coming in with the new one, right? So all of these people, everybody would agree that in an ordinary Motzei Shabbos, when Kiddush is not a factor, everyone agrees that the blessings follow this pattern. Okay, wine, lamp, and Havdalah. Now, the issue comes up where you have a case of Yom Tov that's also going to be starting when Motzei Shabbos comes in, and you have to say a Kiddush, and there's only 1 cup of wine left. So I want to point out that there's no disagreement on the pattern when you're not lacking a cup of wine, where the pattern would be wine, lamp, and Havdalah. The case comes up where you're ending the meal at this funny fashion, and then you only have 1 cup of wine left. That's where this discussion comes in. So the question is going to be now, what do you do where now this holiday comes in, and you're eating, and it ends, and you only have 1 cup of wine left? And Rabbi Yochanan says the 4 blessings should be recited in the sequence represented by the acronym Yikna, which is Y-K-N-H. And the Gemara is going to say it would be wine, which would be Yayin, the lamp, which would be Ner, Kiddush, which is going to be the K in Yikna, the lamp, which is going to be the Nun, the Ner, and then you're going to have Havdalah. And similarly, Rabbi Hanan Barba says in the name of Rav, the sequence of blessings, even when the eve of the Sukkot festival coincides with Motzei Shabbat, would be wine, which is what Rabbi Yochanan is saying, Kiddush, the lamp, the Ner, the Havdalah, and then you would have the Sukkah blessing, and then after that you would have the Shechianu, which is the blessing on something new for the season. And then you have a dispute, and Rabbi Hanina says the proper sequence when Yom Tov comes with Motzei Shabbat would be Nehik, which would be the Nun, the Hey, the Yud, and the Kaf for Kiddush. So it would be first in the sequence. It would be the Ner, that'd be the lamp, then it'd be Havdalah, and then you'd have wine, which would be Yain, and then you have Kiddush. And Shmuel stated a ruling that's going to be similar to that of Rabbi Hanina. So, in this case, it would seem that Shmuel is going to be agreeing with Rabbi Hanina that Havdalah should be said before Kiddush, and this is again going to be a case where the Yom Tov comes in right after the Shabbat ends. And the reasoning behind this comes up with this analogy, and the Gemara says that Rabbi Acha says in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, if a king is departing and at the same time a governor is arriving, we first escort the departing king, and then we welcome the arriving governor. Why would that be? Well, a governor is of a lower status. And first, we're going to be saying the Havdalah to escort out, so to speak, the outgoing king, which would be Shabbat. And then we would say Kiddush to greet the incoming Yom Tov of a lesser holiness. In this case, it would be the governor. And the Gemara now is going to give a third opinion for this, and then we'll finish up the halacha. So the Gemara presents this third opinion. Levi says the proper sequence is Yinka, Yink. So it would be the Yud for wine, or Yain. Then you'd have Havdalah. Then you'd have the Nun for Ner, which is the lamp. And then you would have the Kiddush. And the Gemara is going to comment. It's going to say that the view of Levi is most reasonable, for he has stated a sequence that incorporates the aspects of both other sequences. In other words, that Levi is holding that the blessing over the wine would be said first. And that, by the way, is in agreement with Rabbi Yochanan. And the Haredim is pointing out that he places Havdalah before Kiddush, as stated by Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And Levi's opinion is going to have elements of both of the people's disputes. Okay, so that's going to be how Levi is going to resolve it. And the Gemara now is going to try to come up with a definitive ruling on this issue. And Rabbi Zera inquired for Rabbi Yosei, how do we conduct ourselves in this actual practice? And he said to Rabbi Zera, in accordance with Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, that it's Yikna, which would be wine, Kiddush, lamp, and Havdalah. So always remember Yikna, and you'll be set. And the Gemara notes that indeed the halacha was set up, promulgated according to Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. That's what the Gemara reads. And the Gemara now is going to talk about a different practice from the Amorim. And the Gemara says that when Rabbi Abahu would go to the south, where Rabbi Hanina was the presiding authority, he would act in accordance with Rabbi Hanina, but when he would go down to Tiberias, which was under Rabbi Yochanan's jurisdiction, he would act in accordance with Rabbi Yochanan. And he conducted himself in this manner so not to conflict with a person in his own place. So this is good derech eretz. And the Gemara now is going to challenge one of the opinions that was said earlier. And the Gemara says, concerning the view of Rabbi Hanina, which, by the way, was stating that when Yom Tov comes after Motzei Shabbat, the blessing over the lamp should be recited before Havdalah. The Gemara says that all is well, but there's a difficulty with regards to the view of Rabbi Yochanan when Yom Tov falls on a Motzei Shabbos, according to the view of Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara says, for all other days of the year, when Motzei Shabbos is not being followed by a Yom Tov, does not one recite the blessing over the lamp immediately so that it should not go out before the blessing has been recited? In other words, that the Mishnah in Halacha 5, chapter 8, Halacha 5, is teaching that on an ordinary Motzei Shabbos, the blessing over the lamp is recited at the beginning of the Havdalah sequence before the blessing over the fragrant spices and the Havdalah blessing, and that's according to both Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. And in explaining this rule, the scholars in the academy had a tradition in the name of both Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Yochanan that the rationale was as follows, that people would generally be poor, and that on most nights they did not have any oil with which to light up their homes, and if they were to extend themselves to obtain oil for the Shabbos Eve, they would leave over a bit on the following night's Havdalah service. And they were recognizing that the quantity of leftover oil was often very, very small, so the sages instituted that the blessing over the lamp should be recited right away before the oil is ended. And with the rest of the Havdalah service, could then be recited even if the flame went out. That's going to be the note by the Haredim. So the Gemara is going to say, what does Rabbi Yochanan do with this problem? And the Gemara is going to explain it. Rabbi Yochanan would answer that since this person possesses wine over which to say Kiddush, he presumably is going to be rich enough to have enough oil to ensure that his blessing will not go out in the middle of the Kiddush recitation. And the Gemara is going to press that point. And it's going to say, then let him recite the blessing over the lamp at the very end of the Havdalah service as well. In other words, that we can assume that this person has enough money to buy wine, so he has enough money to buy enough oil. So, equally, why shouldn't he be able to say the blessing over the lamp after the Havdalah, which would follow the Yikna formulation that Rabbi Yochanan points out in the case of Motzei Shabbat coming out, and it goes into a Yom Tov. Why not leave it that way as well? And the Gemara is going to answer. It's going to say, we never instruct one to recite the blessing over the lamp after Havdalah, so as not to negate the proper time for the blessing in the Havdalah of the future Shabbat. In other words, that the Haredim explains that the sages instituted that throughout the year, the blessing over the lamp should be recited before Havdalah so that the flame will never be extinguished, and they did not want to deviate from this order in any instance, even on a Motzei Shabbos that coincides with the Yom Tov, when the underlying reason would be inapplicable. So that's an explanation about this order and the custom and why it is the way it is. Always follow your prayer book, and there's a logic for it. One of the fine points of the ending of this is I like how the Gemara is going to point out the problems with Bet Shammai when it's in the beginning, and how there's no problem with Bet Hillel, but in the end, there's a problem with Bet Hillel's formulation of this particular case, but there's not a problem with Bet Shammai's formulation. Now, why are they doing this, right? There's no disagreement in most of the instances of this, right? The disagreement comes where you're doing a meal and there's 1 cup of wine left. What do? Right? We were just spending all of chapter 7 looking at Zimun and how we're trying to bless Hashem and how important it is, and the importance of Birkat Hamazon as well. And then you also have this other importance of trying to do your Kiddush. What do? Or trying to do your Havdalah. What do? So again, one of the takeaways is that this is a Talmudic point, that it's unlikely in today's day that you're going to have a single cup of wine for all of this, but the idea is that it presents problems when you're coming up with orders, because you can be eating and doing Birkat Hamazon many, many times, and that's going to be a case where you can be eating on a Tuesday, you can be eating on a Wednesday, and you can be doing Zimun many, many times, and you have the blessings over Kiddush once a week. So in a way, the blessings over the zimun would be more frequent. You have a case of something that has frequency versus infrequency. So there's a lot of issues going on over here, and part of it is to sharpen our minds to start thinking about these nuances. It's not telling you, because this is a very important case that you know about just in case you come up with a circumstance, although it can happen. The point is to get you to think deeper about the issues and the mechanics of Bet Shammai's formulation and Bet Hillel's formulation. And that's why the sages left this in 2,000 years later for us to still be working on it like this. Anyway, have a great day.